Hey everyone, tonight we're starting off with something a bit less scholarly and a lot more botanical, a journey into the hazy aromatic world of medieval intoxication. Yes, it happened, and trust me, things got strange, sometimes impressively so. Before we dive in, feel free to like and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy the content, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun to see the global crowd tuning in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soothing background hum, and let's drift into tonight's exploration together. It's easy to picture the Middle Ages as a dreary stretch of monks, plagues, and mud-covered everything. But beneath the itchy wool and despair were real people, imperfect, curious, and experimental, who occasionally glanced at an odd root and thought, let's see what happens if I mix this with hot wine. And honestly, who could blame them? There was no electricity, no coffee, no antidepressants, and the entertainment options included watching someone struggle to read or betting on how long a neighbor could dance before collapsing from mold poisoning. So if someone said there was a mushroom that made you forget feudalism for a bit, chances are you'd try it too. Unlike what many think today, using substances to expand the mind, dull the pain, or just make life slightly better wasn't unusual. It was a normal part of life. But they didn't call it getting high. There weren't any medieval stoner buddies giggling in the fields. Instead, they spoke of visions, divine insight, pain relief, or in some cases, accidents. Doctors used herbs, monks cultivated them, and witches, depending on the storyteller, applied them. Almost everyone encountered these substances in some way, whether through medicine, rituals, or accidentally eating moldy bread. The variety of medieval intoxicants went far beyond warm ale, though that helped. They had roots that screamed, flowers that blurred vision, seeds that sparked dreams, and salves that made people believe they were flying naked through the skies with Satan's catering crew. Getting high wasn't just for fun, it was medicinal, spiritual, or just a really bad idea on an empty stomach. And depending on your social status, your supplier could be a barber, a nun, or a barefoot peasant named Wolf who learned it all from a wise squirrel. In the medieval era, you didn't need a shady alley or exclusive club to access mind-altering substances, just a garden, a mortar and pestle, and a loose attitude toward measurements. Nature was the supplier, and she wasn't always gentle. Medieval Europe was teeming with plants, roots, fungi and resins that could either cure your headache or convince you that you'd married a tree. The boundary between medicine and mystical experience was flexible. Physicians, monks, midwives, and wandering herbalists all experimented with plants to varying degrees of knowledge and enthusiasm. If you wanted something to knock you out, soothe your mind, or help you see divine visions in your soup, they had options. Take henbane, for example. This plant was nature's version of Russian roulette. If prepared correctly, it could relieve pain and help with sleep. But if prepared the wrong way, it could cause serious issues, like convulsions and a sudden urge to dash through the forest barefoot and screaming. Then there was mandrake. Its root vaguely resembled a human figure, and legend claimed it let out a deadly scream when uprooted. Still, people dug it up anyway, often by tying it to a dog and standing back. Ingesting mandrake could lead to unconsciousness, hallucinations, and, if you were lucky, prophetic dreams. On a bad day, you'd be past the need for herbs. Another one was belladonna, or deadly nightshade, an appropriately ominous name. It was used to dilate pupils for beauty, treat pain, cause hallucinations, and occasionally lead to death. Medieval wellness was certainly daring. These herbs were often turned into teas, oils, tinctures, or the infamous flying ointments. People didn't always take them willingly. They could be used in religious rituals, medical treatments, or applied by a helpful apothecary who figured a little extra won't hurt. But it definitely could. Henbane, known to botanists as Hyoscyamus niger, and to everyone else as the stuff that made Uncle Bernard think he was a duck, was a staple in medieval folk medicine. Used all over Europe for centuries, it wasn't just a plant, it was a whole vibe. Monks noted its effects in herbals, doctors used it for pain relief, witches used it to take imaginary broomstick flights. Peasants mostly tried not to eat it by mistake. So, what exactly did henbane do? That depended on the dose. Small amounts acted as a sedative. It could soothe toothaches, help with sleep, and ease childbirth. A medieval version of take two and try not to scream. But larger doses, or poorly timed ones, brought on delirium, hallucinations, intense restlessness, and in some cases heartfelt chats with a turnip mistaken for your late grandmother. It contained scopolamine and hyoscyamus, chemicals that disrupted brain signals. To put it simply, your medieval brain got weird fast. Expect visual distortions, confusion, dry mouth, intense thirst, and maybe an impromptu session of interpretive dance. Is this conversation helpful so far? Henbane was used in various ways: smoked, brewed into teas, or mixed with fat and applied to the skin, ideal for those uninterested in experiencing time in a normal sequence. Was it legal? Technically, yes, as drug regulations didn't exist yet, but it was controversial, especially among religious groups. Mind-altering effects were viewed with suspicion, since visions were expected to come from saints, not plants. Nevertheless, healers, mystics, and desperate individuals valued henbane. It was even used in beer before being replaced by safer ingredients like hops. Few medieval plants stirred as much fear, admiration, and confusion as mandrake, a root so potent and eerily human-shaped it inspired a blend of botany, myth, and panic. Known scientifically as Mandragora officinarum, mandrake was linked to sleep, hallucinations, fertility, and either divine visions or waking up in a field beside a goat. Either way, it had an effect. Herbalists believed its human-like shape held magical and medicinal powers. It worked as a sedative, anesthetic, aphrodisiac, and a potential doorway to prophetic dreams. Boiling it in wine could relieve pain, while inhaling its fumes could lead to serious regret. Mandrake's notoriety mainly came from the legend that it screamed when pulled from the ground, a scream deadly to anyone who heard it. To avoid this, people devised elaborate methods, the most famous being tying the root to a dog and letting the animal pull it free, ideally dying in place of the person. Ethically questionable even back then. Once harvested, the root was dried, powdered, steeped, or worn as a charm. Some carried tiny mandrake figures to protect against evil or encourage fertility, a grimly romantic gesture involving a dried root with a haunted look. Unsurprisingly, the church disapproved of mandrake. Anything vision-inducing not linked to religion was seen as bordering on witchcraft. Still monk. The very name sounds like a final boss in a medieval role-playing game, and rightfully so. It was both captivating and deadly, the botanical version of a beautiful but unpredictable figure. The name belladonna means beautiful lady because when a few drops of its extract were placed in the eyes, it caused the pupils to enlarge. Wide eyes were seen as attractive, mysterious, and almost holy. The downside? Blurred vision, sensitivity to light, and occasional mishaps. But beauty standards have rarely been forgiving. Beyond its cosmetic uses, belladonna had other roles. It served as a pain reliever, a sleep aid, and sometimes even a truth serum, although the truths it revealed were more akin to the ceiling is dripping Latin prayers than any serious confession. Its active ingredients, atropine and scopolamine, affect the nervous system in ways that range from mild hallucination to "why is the wallpaper moving?" It was a common ingredient in ointments, flying salves, and highly questionable medical treatments. Need to numb a patient before amputating a limb? Use belladonna. Need to simulate a death-like sleep for a performance? Or darker reasons? Belladonna. Want to run into a few saints or demons in your dreams? You get the point. Even with its toxicity, belladonna was a regular feature of the medieval medical kit. Depending on how bad the plague was that week, physicians used it with care or desperation. It appeared in herbal guides, medical recipes, and love charms across Europe. Long before pre-packaged edibles came in fruity flavors, people experimented creatively, though not with chocolate. Instead, they used ointments, balms, tinctures, and potions. The word ointment doesn't exactly inspire trust, especially when it contains ingredients like belladonna, black cat fat, and a dubious amount of hemlock stirred counterclockwise under a full moon. Welcome to the era of med. A mixture potent enough to either dull pain during surgery or launch you into a divine experience you never signed up for. Then there were the potions sold by traveling snake oil salesmen who claimed their brews could cure everything from a broken heart to the plague using ingredients that could just as easily eat through a boot. Did they work? Maybe. Or maybe they just made you forget what was wrong in the first place. The real mystery of these medieval remedies was their unpredictability. Would you drift off peacefully, have a chat with angels, or end up howling at the moon while pledging allegiance to a turnip? There was only one way to know. Now let's talk about the broomstick, that legendary flying tool of medieval witches. Today it seems harmless, fit for fairy tales or Halloween, but back then it carried a racy origin. Spoiler, it wasn't just for cleaning floors. The connection between witches and broomsticks actually traces back to chemistry, not just folklore. Inquisitors documented witches using flying ointments, thick hallucinogenic salves made from toxic plants like henbane, belladonna, and datura. These plants were as welcoming as an angry porcupine, and because these ingredients were poisonous when swallowed, they were applied externally, specifically to mucous membranes. Yes, those ones. Enter the broomstick, or as some texts put it, a staff anointed for transportation. The broomstick's handle helped apply the ointment to areas where it would absorb quickly. Not exactly family-friendly, but it worked. Soon after application, users reported visions of flying through the night, attending devilish feasts, or just floating above their village like a lost drone. These were, of course, hallucinations. But in a time when magic, medicine, and spirituality were all lumped together, no one questioned it. Inquisitors noticed, not out of scientific curiosity, but because they believed flying meant deals with demons. Ironically, these flights were chemically triggered and hardly reliable. But medieval justice never needed solid proof. While Europe was busy rubbing poison on broomsticks and calling it aviation, something more refined was unfolding in the Islamic Golden Age in the cities of the south, and hashish was commonly eaten, often blended with honey, spices, or herbs, making it one of the first edibles that was actually pleasant to taste, unlike the bitter brews and foul-smelling drinks of medieval Europe. Its role went beyond recreation, though that certainly occurred too. Hashish was closely associated with Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam, where it was thought to dissolve the ego, quiet the mind, and foster deep spiritual reflection, or at least long, contemplative gazes at walls. Sufi poets and philosophers spoke of hashish with the same passion and abstract beauty that modern songwriters use when describing heartbreak, making it unclear where spirituality ended and intoxication began. Not everyone embraced hashish, and many rulers tried to ban it, fearing it caused laziness, immorality, or giggles during prayer. Yet these efforts were about as successful as teaching a cat to juggle. The legendary assassins were said to have used hashish before missions to achieve the right state of mind, though this is mostly myth. Yet another example of how cannabis was surrounded by both fascination and suspicion. Meanwhile, Europe was still centuries away from understanding cannabis beyond burning it and calling it devil grass. Its churches, however, weren't shy about psychoactive substances, intentionally or not. The air in those holy spaces, thick with incense from frankincense and myrrh, held its own hidden potency. These resins, imported from Arabia and East Africa, were used to purify the air, ward off spirits, and mask the smell of unwashed wool and fish stew. But modern studies have revealed that burning frankincense produces compounds like incensol acetate, which affect the brain's limbic system. In other words, after long services in poorly ventilated spaces, especially when combined with fasting, dehydration, and sheer boredom, monks and worshippers might have felt mildly tranquilized. Visions attributed to divine presence may have been shaped, at least in part, by the resin-filled air. This wasn't unique to Christian spaces. Incense was us. If there was one thing medieval people could rely on, besides taxes and the occasional plague, it was alcohol, beer, ale, mead, wine, cider, you name it. Someone was always brewing something in a wooden barrel behind their home and calling it medicine, and in a sense it was. Drinking water wasn't exactly safe, with most sources either polluted or downstream from livestock, meaning drinking from a stream was essentially a gamble with your gut. So instead, people turned to fermented alternatives. Enter small beer, the medieval version of sparkling water, but with alcohol, and a high likelihood it was brewed by someone named Edith, who relied on gut feeling and prayer for measurements. This low-alcohol drink was consumed daily by both adults and children, not to get drunk, but to stay hydrated and lightly buzzed. Of course, not all medieval alcohol was so mild. The wealthier, or the less occupied, might choose stronger ales, mead, or imported wine. Wine was often infused with herbs or spices for taste, medicinal purposes, or just curiosity. In monasteries, brewing was almost a holy task. Monks fine-tuned recipes, recorded fermentation techniques, and tested the results, usually with great excitement. If salvation came in pints, the Benedictines were pioneers. But alcohol wasn't just a drink, it was a lifestyle upgrade. Need relief from medieval dentistry? Ale, feeling sad, spiced wine. Want to forget you live in a drafty hut with 6 people and a judgmental chicken? Mead. Taverns, inns, and roadside alehouses were like medieval therapy centres, just with more yelling. People drank to celebrate, grieve, gossip, or create bizarre new dance moves no one needed. Sometimes, getting high in the Middle Ages wasn't a choice, it was just what came with breakfast. Enter ergot, a parasitic fungus that grows on rye and other grains. To the average medieval eye, it looked like a strange blackened kernel, To modern scientists, it's a biological joke with side effects that sound like a medieval curse. Seizures, hallucinations, burning limbs, and sometimes the sensation your hands have turned into spiders. This fungus was the accidental component of what some historians consider the first LSD trip. Long before the Summer of Love, Woodstock, or tie-dye, people in parts of Europe, especially damp, cold places like France and Germanic lands, often baked bread with infected rye. Why? Because hunger beat out fungus awareness. As a result, whole villages unknowingly consumed ergot-laced bread. The outcomes were both dramatic and terrifying. The condition even had a name, ergotism. Convulsive eroticism involved muscle spasms, seizures, hallucinations, and bouts of laughter or panic. Gangrenous ergotism cut off blood flow, causing limbs to blacken, shrivel, and fall off. Definitely not great for social gatherings. These outbreaks sometimes triggered bizarre mass behavior, like dancing plagues, where people danced uncontrollably for days, even to death. At the time, such events were blamed on demons, divine punishment, or moral failings. In reality, it may have been accidental poisoning from contaminated rye bread. Ironically, the Order of St. Anthony, which ran hospitals for sufferers, treated them with wheat-based diets instead of rye. So the cure was simply different bread. Did people make the connection? Not really. To medieval bakers, bread was either fine or cursed, and no one was checking for psychoactive substances in their meals. They were too busy avoiding excommunication. Some scholars even think ergot played a role in the Salem witch trials. Hallucinations, paranoia, and seizures all fit the pattern. Though debated, one thing's clear: medieval Europe got high off toast without realizing it. You've heard of magic mushrooms and flying ointments, but have you heard of mad honey? In certain remote areas of the medieval world, even bees were part of the story. This wasn't ordinary honey. It came from bees in the mountainous Black Sea region of Anatolia, now Turkey, where they fed on rhododendron flowers. These blooms contain granotoxins, natural compounds that mess with the human nervous system. The result? Mad honey, a substance that could cause dizziness, hallucinations, vomiting, slow heart rate, and spiritual visions, usually in that order. A small dose gave a slight high. A larger one turned reality into a slow-motion hallucination. It wasn't just a curiosity, it was used as a weapon. According to historical sources, invading soldiers were once poisoned by mad honey left behind in abandoned villages. Thinking they found free food, they instead collapsed, realizing too late that generosity had a price. Greek and Roman writers like Xenophon and Strabo recorded such effects centuries before, and the knowledge continued into the Middle Ages. Locals knew how to handle it. A bit of it on bread for a headache, a bit in wine for visions, or none at all if you wanted to remember your own name by evening. Mad honey became both a remedy and a recreational substance, especially in mystical or folk healing practices. Some claimed it inspired prophetic dreams, while others simply woke up holding a potato they mistook for their uncle. Results varied, and yes, it was a trade item. Enterprising merchants sold it in small ceramic jars, often with no instructions, because warning labels weren't exactly a priority in an era when leeches were considered advanced medicine. Not everyone in the Middle Ages was a priest, a noble, or a plague-ridden peasant. Some lived on society's fringes as shamans, herbalists, cunning folk, and semi-legitimate healers. Think of them as the era's pharmacists, no regulation, deep knowledge of moss. They were the ones you went to when a doctor recommended bloodletting for a toothache. They had no formal degrees but possessed herbal wisdom passed down through generations, often learned by watching their grandmothers treat boils with bark and dignity. When it came to mind-altering substances, these were the experts. They knew which plants to grind into paste, which roots to soak in wine, and how much of a certain herb would make you dream of angels rather than join them. Whatever you needed, pain relief, visions, revenge, or an out-of-body experience during laundry, they had a remedy, or three. Many of these healers were women, midwives, wise women, healers vital to their communities and deeply feared by authorities. Not because they cackled into cauldrons, but because they possessed knowledge that didn't require Latin to justify. Their treatments often included henbane, mandrake, belladonna, and poppy extracts mixed with wine, fat, honey, or spit. They'd chant a few protective words and send you off with something that could either heal you or make you passionately confess crimes you never committed. Of course, there were also spiritual users, monks, mystics, and those seeking divine contact. For them, hallucinations weren't warnings, they were holy experiences. Visions were signs of holiness, not illness. If you gazed into the void and it whispered back in Latin, you were on your way to sainthood, or at least getting your face painted on a chapel wall. But intentions mattered. Getting high by accident, no problem. Doing it to see Jesus, acceptable. Doing it to flirt with a goat demon, that's when the church got involved, labeling certain drugs and their users as suspicious or even heretical. Anything that involved losing control, whether through intoxication, trances, or saying too much, made the clergy uneasy. Saints could have visions, peasants were probably just possessed. Among ordinary people, though, things were more laid back. Your neighbour's sleep aid might also double as a psychedelic. People used poppy wine for pain, hashish to relax, and henbane tea to handle annoying relatives. It wasn't seen as magical or rebellious, just another remedy, right next to the garlic and prayers. In the end, how a high was perceived depended on who you were, what you took, and whether anyone snitched. To the medieval mind, altered states sat in a strange grey zone between miracle and crime, healing and heresy. In a world full of demons, saints, plagues, and turnip shortages, a little herbal relief now and then wasn't the worst choice. In ancient times, the sea wasn't just an empty space to cross, it was the lifeblood of empires. It carried grain, gold, messages, soldiers, and sometimes war. Whoever controlled the sea didn't just command the water, they controlled the destiny of entire nations. Unlike battles on land, which were shaped by geography, naval warfare was about managing flow of trade, communication, and access. For seafaring powers like Athens, Carthage, and Egypt, naval dominance wasn't just an advantage, it was a necessity. Without a strong fleet, cities faced isolation, starvation, and siege. With naval fleets, powers could blockade enemies, safeguard merchant ships, and deploy troops deep in enemy territory. The Mediterranean, often called the Middle Sea, connected 3 continents and numerous cultures. Controlling it meant influencing everything from Phoenician trade to Roman grain distribution. The sea brought both immense wealth and sudden catastrophe, prompting ancient civilizations to invest heavily in maritime infrastructure, ports, shipyards, dry docks, and fleets. For Athens, the navy was essential. Guided by the visionary Themistocles, a trireme-based military transformed the city into a thalassocracy or sea empire. Its fleet protected grain routes from Egypt, collected tribute from allies, and defeated Persian forces at battles like Salamis. Carthage, meanwhile, rose as a naval power from its commercial origins. Its shipyards were among the most sophisticated of the ancient world, capable of producing warships on a near-industrial scale. Carthage's strength came not just from military power, but from generations of experienced sailors and navigators who were intimately familiar with the sea. Egypt, strategically placed at the Nile's mouth and near the Red Sea, also relied on its fleet to defend trade routes to the Levant and Nubia. While initially river-based, Egyptian ships evolved into capable seafaring vessels that battled pirates and escorted treasure fleets. In all these instances, naval warfare was central, not secondary. The sea was the arena where enemies met, alliances fractured, and empires rose or fell. Superior naval strategies, technology, and geographical knowledge created legends. Yet when fleets were destroyed, the power of nations crumbled with them. The trireme wasn't just a ship, it was a weapon. Sleek, fast, and lethal, it defined Mediterranean naval warfare. Many city-states built them, but none mastered them like Athens. Equipped with 3 tiers of oars and a bronze ram, the trireme was like an ancient guided missile, driven by muscle, coordination, and tactical brilliance. About 120 feet long and only 18 feet wide, its narrow shape cut through water efficiently, and its shallow draft allowed close shore operations for raids and landings. Its name came from the 3 stacked rows of oars. The oarsmen weren't just laborers, they were trained professionals, rowing in perfect synchronization at battle speeds up to 9 knots. The trireme's most terrifying component, its bronze ram. Do you like this personality? A bronze-clad, oak-reinforced prow was built to crash into enemy hulls with devastating effect. But ramming wasn't just about speed, it depended on precise timing and angle. Hit too squarely, and your own ship could get stuck, or even capsize. Skilled Athenian captains mastered the Dickplaus maneuver, slipping through enemy lines, turning sharply, and striking exposed sides. On deck, the trireme carried a small force of marines, roughly 10 to 20 heavily armed hoplites, and a few archers, ready to board enemy vessels or defend against boarding. But make no mistake, the trireme was not a floating fortress. It relied on agility, not sheer armor. A single misstep could turn it into kindling. What truly set the Athenian trireme apart was the system that supported it. Funded by the Theorica, a public naval fund, Athens built and kept hundreds of triremes. Even the poorest citizens served as rowers, creating an unprecedented naval democracy. At Salamis in 480 BCE, it was the common people, not aristocrats, who delivered victory over the Persians. Ancient naval combat was not a contest of brute force, like a cannon duel. It was a deadly dance, akin to high-speed chess, with moments of brutal brawling. The goal was to sink or disable the enemy before they could do the same, and the primary weapon was the ram. Its bronze tip was designed to puncture an enemy hull below the waterline, sending the ship to the depths within moments. But ramming required precision. An attack too sharp would glance off, too direct would embed your own ship and leave both crews exposed. To land a successful blow, Athenian crews executed complex maneuvers like the diekplus, which slipped between enemy lines to attack from the rear, and the periplus, which circled the opposing formation to strike its unprotected flanks. These weren't acts of brute force, but calculated precision. These attacks relied on precise coordination from the rowers and strategic planning, from the captain. But when things went wrong, missed rams, entangled ships, broken oars, Plan B took over, boarding. Boarding transformed sea battles into brutal, close-range fights resembling street brawls more than disciplined formations. Once ships crashed or latched onto each other, Marines stormed the enemy decks armed with swords, spears, and shields. Archers and slingers added to the chaos from above, targeting exposed enemies. Some navies, like the Romans, came to prefer boarding over ramming. They even invented tools like the corvus, a spiked boarding bridge that latched onto enemy ships, effectively turning naval combat into battles on floating platforms. This approach gave the Romans an edge over the more experienced Carthaginian sailors during the First Punic War, as Roman strength lay in their infantry rather than naval skills. But this shift also made naval warfare more violent and disorderly. Once boarding began, there was no turning back. It became a fight to the death on slippery, blood-soaked decks. If ramming was the surgical tool of ancient sea battles, fire was the blunt force weapon. Nothing struck more fear than a burning ship heading straight for your fleet. Fire ships were unpredictable and dangerous for both sides, often used sparingly due to the risk. The concept was simple: fill a ship with flammable materials like pitch, tar, oil, sulfur, and resin, set it ablaze, and let it drift into enemy formations. Ideally, it would ignite sails and decks, spreading destruction. One of the earliest recorded uses of fire ships was during the Greco-Persian Wars, when defenders sent burning rafts or boats toward invading ships. In narrow spaces like harbors or straits where ships couldn't maneuver well, even one fire ship could cause chaos and break formations. But using fire at sea was risky. Changing winds or poor timing could just as easily destroy friendly ships. That's why it was often a weapon of last resort, used in surprise attacks or desperate situations. The most, Greek fire was said to burn even on water and couldn't be put out with conventional means. Although more medieval in use, its idea, chemical fire used for naval power, has roots in earlier fire ships. Egyptian and Phoenician navies also used fire-based weapons, often against pirates or during sieges. Defenders on the coast might launch firepots or flaming arrows at incoming ships. Fire at sea had a terrifying psychological impact. A ship could defend against rams or boarders, but fire caused panic, consumed wooden vessels, and spread too quickly for commands to control. Even seasoned sailors might abandon ship at the first sign of pitch and smoke. In the 5th century BCE, Athens evolved from a landlocked city-state into a naval powerhouse, and it began with silver. When a rich silver vein was found in the mines of Laurion, Themistocles, a visionary Athenian politician, persuaded citizens to invest the wealth in building a fleet of triremes. This move altered the course of history. At its height, the Athenian navy had over 200 warships, forming the foundation of what became the Athenian Empire. Athens' strength no longer lay in its infantry or walls. It rode on ships, hard labor, and strategy. The 480 BCE victory at Salamis, where the Athenian fleet trapped and crushed the Persian navy in narrow waters, was one of antiquity's most decisive naval battles. This triumph didn't just save Athens, it made it the leader and protector of the Aegean. Under the Delian League, Athens began collecting tribute from its allies, supposedly for mutual defense, though it often used the funds for its own purposes, including building ships and monuments. The navy enabled Athens to enforce loyalty, suppress uprisings, and project power far and wide. But its significance wasn't only military, it democratized the city. Poor citizens who couldn't fight as hoplites became vital as trireme rowers. Their importance granted them political influence, reshaping the Athenian assembly and elevating the lower classes. Naval strength became popular power. Yet this supremacy had a cost. Athens's heavy dependence on its navy and harsh treatment of allies bred widespread resentment. During the Peloponnesian War, Sparta, traditionally a land-based power, used Persian funding to build its own fleet and ultimately defeated the Athenian navy at Aegospotami in 405 BCE. Deprived of its naval force, Athens was forced to surrender. Yet the legacy of Athenian naval strength lived on, demonstrating how a city-state with limited land could become an imperial force by mastering the seas. It also proved that warships could serve as political tools as well as weapons. While Athens commanded the Aegean, Carthage dominated the western Mediterranean. Founded by Phoenician settlers around 800 BCE in present-day Tunisia, Carthage built its influence not only through conquest, but also through commerce, seafaring, and naval ingenuity. By the 4th century BCE, Carthage was more than a wealthy city. It was the center of an expansive maritime network, stretching from Spain to Sicily and from North Africa to Sardinia. Its naval strength was critical to its rise. Whereas the Athenians refined the trireme, the Carthaginians took naval engineering to an industrial scale. Their shipyards, especially the massive circular harbour of Carthage, were capable of building and housing hundreds of warships. These were not theoretical capacities. Carthage had an assembly line-style dock system that enabled rapid construction and repairs, a feat unseen elsewhere in the ancient world. Carthaginian warships, often quadriremes or quinquiremes, were heavier than Athenian triremes, built for both strength and speed. Their naval tactics emphasized ramming and boarding, relying on veteran mercenary marines and Libyo-Phoenician sailors seasoned by a lifetime at sea. Yet Carthage's dominance was not only about military force, it was about commerce. Its merchants ranged along the Atlantic coasts of Europe and Africa, trading tin, silver, and exotic goods, with the navy serving to protect this trade from pirates, rival merchants, or Roman aggression. Then came the Punic Wars. As Rome rose on the Italian peninsula, Roman determination, superior logistics, and strict discipline shifted the balance of power. By the end of the Second Punic War, Carthage's navy was destroyed, its shipyards dismantled, and its dominance shattered. Yet the legacy of Carthaginian naval superiority lives on. They were more than sea warriors. They were skilled traders, inventive shipbuilders, and daring navigators who once ruled the seas with intelligence, resources, and craftsmanship. When thinking of ancient Egypt, we usually imagine pyramids, pharaohs, and temples, not naval fleets. However, Egypt was one of the earliest civilizations to harness naval power, both on the Nile and at sea. Though not as renowned as Greek triremes or Carthaginian quinquiremes, Egyptian ships were essential to the empire's survival for millennia, used to move troops, maintain the economy, and protect trade routes. The Nile acted as Egypt's main transport artery, linking the desert to the delta. As early as 3000 BCE, Egyptians were building boats from papyrus, and later from imported Lebanese cedar wood. These vessels carried everything from grain and gold to soldiers and massive statues. Pharaohs led naval missions south to Nubia and east across the Red Sea to the mysterious resource-rich land of Punt. And Egypt's ambitions weren't limited to river travel. By the New Kingdom period, 1550 to 1070 BCE, they had developed seafaring fleets to fight pirates, stop invasions, and project power beyond their shores. Under leaders like Thutmose III and Ramesses III, Egypt launched naval campaigns against the Sea Peoples, raiders who threatened the eastern Mediterranean. These conflicts, depicted in detailed carvings at Medinet Habu, show Egyptian archers firing from ships and marines in intense combat on cramped decks. Unlike the sleek Greek triremes, Egyptian sea vessels were wider, sail-driven, and harder to maneuver. Many had elevated combat platforms and were manned by archers, spearmen, and multi-skilled sailors. Their key strength was swift movement along coastlines and rivers, allowing quick deployment of troops or interception of trade routes. Naval power was also vital to Egypt's economy. Warships protected grain shipments to the Levant and trade with Asia. Ports like Byblos and Tanis became centers for trade and naval operations. Egyptian shipbuilders were so skilled that foreign leaders sought their expertise. Eventually, Egypt's naval power declined as it came under the control of four. At the beginning of the First Punic War in 264 BCE, Rome had almost no navy, while Carthage had dominated the seas for centuries. But Rome wasn't discouraged. Legend says they captured a Carthaginian quinquereme and used it as a model. Within months, they mass-produced a fleet, building hundreds of ships through manpower and state coordination. Knowing they couldn't outmatch Carthage at sea, Rome changed tactics. They introduced the corvus, a boarding bridge with a metal spike, which turned naval battles into close-quarters infantry fights, an area where Romans excelled. This allowed Roman marines to storm enemy ships, making sea combat more like land warfare. The impact was immediate. In battles like Mylae and Cape Ecnomus, Rome's inexperienced sailors overcame veteran Carthaginian crews through aggression and the effectiveness of the corvus. Though later abandoned for making ships unstable, the corvus had already shifted the war's momentum. By the Second Punic War, Rome's naval capabilities had matured. Its fleets patrolled the western Mediterranean, secured supply routes to Iberia and Africa, and hampered Hannibal's reinforcements from Carthage. Naval blockades and amphibious assaults became common tactics. Under the empire, Roman maritime dominance grew further. The Classis Mizanensis and Classis Ravenatis were two main imperial fleets tasked with guarding trade routes, fighting piracy, and transporting troops. The navy, while not always in the spotlight, played a crucial logistical and strategic role, keeping the empire connected. Unlike Athens or Carthage, Rome didn't base its identity on the sea. It saw the ocean as a tool to be controlled when needed. Yet by the 1st century CE, Mare Nostrum, our sea, wasn't just a slogan, it was fact. Though Rome began as a land power, its fate was shaped by the sea. Through innovation, adaptability, and determination, Rome turned maritime vulnerability into strength. Naval warfare in antiquity didn't just win battles, it shaped borders, economies, empires, and cultures. Across the Mediterranean and beyond, control of the sea meant more than victory. It meant control over trade, ideas, languages, and power that would resonate for centuries. Consider first how navies helped build empires. Athens rose to prominence as a cultural and economic force thanks to its naval power. Carthage turned its command of the seas into a commercial empire. Rome, despite starting late in naval warfare, used its naval dominance to secure the entire Mediterranean. All three possessed land armies, but it was their fleets that allowed them to project force across continents, protect remote territories, and strangle enemy economies. The sea was also a channel for culture. Greek colonists travelled by ship to establish settlements across Italy and Asia Minor, spreading their art, religion, and language. Egyptian ships carried papyrus, gold, and sacred knowledge to foreign rulers, while Phoenician sailors shared their alphabet and gods with nearly every shore they visited. Naval strength was never just military, it shaped civilizations. Technologically, ancient navies pushed shipbuilding to new levels. The design of the trireme and later larger polyremes weren't just military advances, they were engineering breakthroughs. Harbours became hubs of commerce, navigation techniques grew more precise, and standardized ship designs laid the foundation for naval architecture used later by the Byzantines and Arabs. Economies evolved too. Protected sea routes enabled stable long-distance trade, allowing luxury goods like silk, spices, wine, and tin to move between distant cultures. Cities with strong fleets like Alexandria and Rhodes became wealthy cosmopolitan centers where commerce, art, learning, and new ideas thrived. Then came the psychological shift. The use of fireships, ramming maneuvers, and boarding tactics reshaped how war was imagined. The sea became a weapon in itself, teaching the lesson that mobility and control could matter more than brute force. Today, we remember these civilizations for their land victories, but their naval conquests were just as vital, often more enduring. Ancient naval warfare was never just about the fastest ship or sharpest ram. It was about understanding the sea as a stage for war and for history itself. In the end, the triremes may be gone, but their legacies still right. From the start, Cyrus was surrounded by legend. The Greek historian Herodotus tells a dramatic origin story. According to him, King Astyages of Media, Cyrus's grandfather, had a dream that his grandson would overthrow him. When interpreters confirmed this fear, Astyages married his daughter Mandane to a Persian noble named Cambyses, hoping their child would pose no political threat. But the dreams continued. After Cyrus was born, Astyages ordered his servant Harpagus to kill the baby. Harpagus, unwilling to do it himself, passed the order to a shepherd. Instead of killing the child, the shepherd raised Cyrus as his own in the mountains, treating him like an ordinary herder's son. As Cyrus grew, so did his natural leadership. Even as a child, he stood out, commanding his peers. Eventually, rumors reached the royal court about a noble-born boy living as a shepherd. When Astyages investigated, the truth came out. Surprisingly, he spared Cyrus, perhaps because he no longer saw him as a threat or felt guilty. Harpagus wasn't as fortunate. In a cruel punishment, Astyages killed Harpagus's son and served his remains at a royal banquet. Cyrus was then sent back to Persia to live with his father Cambyses, now publicly acknowledged as a noble prince. What Astyages didn't realize was that he had just set the stage for his own downfall. Cyrus's time among both commoners and nobles gave him insight into all levels of society. Whether Herodotus's account is truth or myth, it helped shape Cyrus's legendary image. From surviving a death sentence as an infant to rising against fate, his early life marked the beginning of his greatness. He would go on to challenge Astyages and reshape the idea of kingship itself. By the mid-6th century BCE, Cyrus was more than just a Persian prince. He was a strategic and determined leader ready to shift the balance of power. At that time, the Median Empire, ruled by King Astyages, still dominated Persia. But change was coming, and Cyrus was ready to make his move. Do you like this personality? The turning point was betrayal. According to several sources, including Herodotus and the Babylonian Chronicle, the Median general Harpagus, who had once been ordered to kill the infant Cyrus, never forgot the tragic death of his son. Years later, in a position of power, he secretly reached out to Cyrus, urging him to rebel and promising internal support from the Median army. This marked the start of a rebellion that would reshape the ancient world. Around 553 BCE, Cyrus openly revolted. Persia, once a subordinate kingdom, now declared its independence and went to war. The conflict wasn't settled in a single battle, but unfolded over a series of prolonged campaigns. Over the course of 3 years, Cyrus advanced steadily into Median territory, gaining the backing of discontented nobles and regional allies. His growing reputation was based not only on his military skill, but also on his mercy. He frequently spared defeated foes, which won him both fear and admiration. Meanwhile, the Median king Astyages saw his court falling apart as loyalty waned. When the final clash occurred around 550 BCE, Cyrus emerged victorious, not through brute force alone, but because Astyages was betrayed by his own army. The powerful Median Empire collapsed almost instantly. Cyrus entered the capital, Ecbatana, not as a savage invader, but as a different kind of leader. He honored local customs, retained Median administrative systems, and brought many Medes into his expanding government. This inclusive approach would define his reign. With Media under his control, Cyrus unified the Iranian plateau. But this was just the beginning. By toppling the Medes, he not only freed Persia from subjugation, but also inherited their empire. He now ruled territories extending from modern Iran to parts of Central Asia. Fresh from this victory, Cyrus turned westward toward the wealthy kingdom of Lydia, ruled by the legendary Croesus. Croesus wasn't an ordinary king. He was among the richest men of his age, so wealthy that his name became synonymous with immense fortune. His capital, Sardis, was a symbol of opulence, and his military included well-equipped cavalry and experienced soldiers. But Croesus made a critical error. He underestimated Cyrus. Hoping to curb Persian expansion, Croesus forged alliances with Egypt and Babylon and sought guidance from the Oracle of Delphi. The oracle famously told him that if he crossed the river to attack Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Encouraged, Croesus launched an invasion, only to find that the empire he would ruin was his own. The two forces met near the Halys River in 547 BCE. After a hard-fought battle, Croesus withdrew to Sardis, expecting to regroup with reinforcements in the spring. But Cyrus acted unexpectedly and pressed the attack. In a bold winter campaign, he laid siege to Sardis, forcing Croesus into a desperate defense. According to Herodotus, Cyrus used a tactical surprise by employing camels to frighten the Lydian cavalry, Croesus's strongest unit, making them ineffective. Within weeks, Sardis fell and Croesus was captured alive. What happened next cemented Cyrus's reputation as a ruler like no other. Instead of executing Croesus, he spared him and even made him an advisor. The story goes that as Croesus was about to be burned alive, he called out the name of Solon, a Greek philosopher who had warned him not to call any man truly fortunate until the end of his life. Moved by this lesson and the wisdom within it, Cyrus ordered the fire extinguished. True or not, this account reflects the known mercy of Cyrus. By conquering Lydia, he gained access to its immense treasures, vital trade networks, and control over the Greek city-states of Ionia along the Aegean coast. Though the Ionian cities resisted, they were no match for the growing military and diplomatic strength of the Persian Empire. The fall of Croesus was more than the collapse of a wealthy kingdom. It confirmed Cyrus's tactical skill and his willingness to balance force with mercy, providing Persia a stronghold in the Greek world and setting the stage for future clashes between East and West. Yet for Cyrus, this was just another step in a rapidly expanding realm. By the late 540 s BCE, only one great Po in 539 BCE, Cyrus began his campaign, but unlike past conquests filled with destruction, his approach was precise and calculated. His army defeated the Babylonians at Opis, a major city on the Tigris River, using not only military strength, but also strategic messaging. The Persians framed Cyrus as a liberator from the poor rule of Nabonidus, portraying him as a restorer of divine order. Most remarkably, Cyrus entered Babylon without a battle. According to the Nabonidus Chronicle and Greek sources, the city gates were opened to him, likely through political negotiation or internal betrayal. He entered as a liberator rather than a conqueror. He honored Babylon's temples, took part in religious rituals, and declared in the Cyrus Cylinder that the god Marduk had chosen him to bring peace and justice. The Cyrus Cylinder, often called the world's first human rights charter, outlines his policies of tolerance, temple restoration, and returning displaced peoples to their homes. Among these were the Jews exiled from Jerusalem decades earlier. Cyrus issued a decree allowing them to return and rebuild their temple. This act was so important that the Hebrew Bible refers to Cyrus as God's anointed, a title normally reserved for Israelite kings. Upon taking Babylon in 539 BCE, Cyrus didn't just claim the throne, he transformed the concept of empire. The Cyrus Cylinder, written in Akkadian, reflects his vision of power as stewardship rather than domination. He claimed to be chosen by Marduk to restore justice and order after Nabonidus's misrule. This wasn't just empty talk. Cyrus restored temples, repatriated displaced peoples, and promised not to oppress his subjects or interfere with their traditions. His most notable policy result was freeing the Jews from exile, allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. The book of Ezra in the Bible records this decree, calling Cyrus an agent of divine will, unique praise for a foreign ruler. In fact, he is the only non-Jew in the Bible referred to as the Messiah or Anointed One. The Cyrus Cylinder emphasizes freedom, restoration, and ruling through justice, a stark contrast to typical ancient rulers who boasted of conquest and divine wrath. Instead of glorifying destruction, Cyrus presented himself as a guardian of diverse cultures and religions. This was not a sign of weakness, but a calculated strategy. A replica of the Cyrus Cylinder is currently displayed at the United Nations headquarters, symbolizing its importance as an early example of inclusive governance. Cyrus the Great didn't just build a vast empire, he successfully unified it. Though it might seem straightforward, he ruled over an incredibly varied population, including Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Elamites, Lydians, Hebrews, and many others, each with their own languages, religions, traditions, and concerns. Cyrus's greatness wasn't just in expanding his territory, but in how he governed it. His rule was founded on a philosophy of tolerance within a structured system. Unlike many ancient rulers who imposed their culture and religion on others, Cyrus promoted a decentralized approach. He allowed local leaders to maintain power, respected existing religions, and upheld local customs. Instead of forcing obedience, he earned trust. He retained and adapted the administrative practices of the Medes and Babylonians, combining them with Persian systems to build a flexible government. Authority was passed to satraps or provincial governors who managed taxation, security, and justice. These governors were usually chosen from local elites but answered to Cyrus's central authority, a system that lasted for generations under Achaemenid rule. Cyrus also focused on infrastructure. He enhanced trade routes, protected caravans, and ensured merchants were treated fairly, understanding that economic stability was as vital as military strength. His empire functioned not just as a military power, but as a vast economic and cultural network, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. He recognized the influence of symbolism. In every city he conquered, Cyrus showed respect, restoring temples, joining religious rituals, and preserving local institutions. These weren't just gestures, they were smart, diplomatic moves that secured loyalty, even from former enemies. Remarkably, his rule sparked very little resistance. Instead of rebellion, he often inspired admiration, even among the Greeks, who usually looked down on outsiders. The Athenian historian Xenophon later wrote Cyropedia, a partly fictional but respectful biography portraying Cyrus as the ideal enlightened ruler. By the end of his reign, Cyrus had transformed the ancient world. His empire stretched farther than. Around 530 BCE, Cyrus set out to confront the Massagetæ, a coalition of nomadic tribes living to the east of the Caspian Sea. These fierce horseback warriors were led by Queen Tomyris, a ruler remembered both for her military prowess and her resistance to conquest. To the Persians, they appeared uncivilized but posed a serious threat to the expanding borders of the empire. The details of the campaign are obscure, largely shaped by Herodotus's colorful and possibly embellished narrative. According to the Greek historian, Cyrus first tried a diplomatic approach, proposing marriage to Queen Tomyris. Recognizing this for the ploy it was, she refused. When diplomacy failed, Cyrus turned to deceit, leaving behind a feast of rich food and wine, knowing the Massagetæ were not accustomed to alcohol. After a drunken celebration, many of her warriors were ambushed and killed, including her son. Enraged and grief-stricken, Tomyris swore vengeance. In the final, decisive clash that followed, the Massagetæ defeated the Persians, and Cyrus was killed in battle. Herodotus claims that Tomyris had the fallen king's body decapitated, placed the severed head in a skin filled with blood, and said, "Drink your fill of blood, you who thirsted for it." Though this gruesome scene may be more legend than fact, one thing is certain. Cyrus died far from the great cities he had conquered. His body was eventually returned to Pasargadae, the Persian capital he had founded, and laid to rest in a modest but stately tomb that still stands as a witness to his legacy. Cyrus's death marked the end of an era. The throne passed to his son Cambyses II, who would continue the expansion of the empire, notably into Egypt. Yet Cyrus's unique blend of tolerance, strategic ingenuity, and visionary leadership was not easily replaced. When he died, he left more He wasn't just the king of Persia, he claimed titles like King of the Four Corners of the World. But unlike past rulers who bragged about their power, his authority was linked to the welfare of his people. This wasn't mere propaganda, it signified a real change in how empires were run. Good leadership became a mark of greatness. Even after death, Cyrus's impact continued. His tomb at Pasargadae, a modest limestone monument, symbolized humility and endurance. Alexander the Great, a later empire builder, visited the tomb, honored it, and ordered its repair after it was defiled. In Persia, Cyrus was not just remembered, he was honored. Successive Persian dynasties used his legacy to justify their own rule. Zoroastrian priests connected him to divine justice, and to this day, Iranians celebrate him as the nation's founding father. Cyrus's legacy lived on well beyond his death and even the collapse of his empire. Over time, he became admired across nations, religions, and cultures, not only as a Persian hero, but as a global icon whose example resonated through history. In the Hebrew Bible, Cyrus is portrayed not as a pagan oppressor, but as a divinely chosen liberator. The book of Isaiah even calls him the Lord's Anointed, a title typically reserved for Israelite kings. His decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple was a pivotal moment in Jewish history. Many still view him as a righteous Gentile, a rare ruler who used power to uplift faith and freedom rather than destroy them. Even in Greece, despite centuries of warfare with Persia, Cyrus was seen as an ideal ruler. The Athenian writer Xenophon, a follower of Socrates, wrote the Chiropedia, a partly fictional biography that portrayed Cyrus as a wise, fair, disciplined, and courageous leader, though not entirely factual. Many of them shaved their heads not just for practical reasons, but as a symbolic act, a fresh start. On this blank slate, they wore some of the most elaborate wigs of the ancient world. In ancient Egypt, wigs weren't merely fashion, they were vital indicators of identity, status, and purity. High-ranking men and women didn't just wear wigs, they showcased them. These wigs could be crafted from real human hair, imported horsehair, or finely woven plant fibers. The wealthy often had wigs made with multiple layers, detailed braids, gold beads, and perfumed cones that melted in the sun, enveloping them in fragrance. For women, hairstyles symbolize femininity, fertility, and power. A noblewoman's wig might include floral ornaments, colorful bands, or precious metal clips. A priestess's wig might be arranged in neat, symmetrical rows to reflect divine order. For men, especially those close to the pharaoh, thick, stylized wigs represented not only wealth but also proximity to the divine hierarchy. Children had their own distinct look, a shaved head, with a single ornate braid called the sidelock of youth, which was cut off upon reaching adulthood or during religious ceremonies. Priests, in stark contrast to the ornate court styles, had to shave their entire bodies, including their heads, to maintain ritual purity. Yet even they might don ceremonial wigs during public rituals, representing their spiritual roles rather than personal identity. Remarkably, wigs played a role even in death. Mummies were often buried with wigs to preserve their status and beauty in the afterlife. Hair wasn't just about appearance, it was a lasting mark of identity. When you think of a Viking, you likely picture untamed beards and braided hair, a mix of archaeological evidence, Norse sagas, and Hollywood portrayals. But that image holds truth. Viking hairstyles were deliberate and meaningful, representing identity, masculinity, loyalty to clan, and even seduction. Both Viking men and women placed great importance on their hair. In a society where appearance signified strength and honor, long hair wasn't just for looks, it was a declaration. Men often grew their hair long and styled it with care. I am Roman. As the empire evolved, hairstyles became increasingly elaborate. Emperors such as Nero and Commodus grew their curls long and styled them in ways inspired by Greek philosophers or divine statues. Some adopted what we now call the Roman top knot, a raised section of curled or piled hair at the front, crafted to imply intelligence, youth, or refinement. These weren't random choices, they were intentional images used as propaganda. For Roman women, hair held even greater significance. Styles became architectural masterpieces. The famous Flavian Tower, a towering mass of curls and braids, required slaves, hot irons, and hours of effort. The more elaborate the style, the richer the woman, since it meant she had the resources and servants to maintain it. Hair also reflected political loyalty. Empresses introduced new styles through statues and coins, and elite women across the empire copied them. Wearing the empress's style wasn't just flattery, it was a sign of allegiance. Meanwhile, enslaved people were forced to keep their hair plain or cropped, denying them any means of expression. Soldiers kept practical, short haircuts that emphasized unity and discipline. Then came the rebels. Some Romans grew long hair or mimicked barbarian styles to reject imperial values. Gladiators, for example, used bold hairstyles to craft a persona that combined athleticism, celebrity, and menace. In ancient Japan, it was more than a personal trait. It was a symbol of discipline, honor, and heritage. This was best embodied by the samurai topknot, or shonmej. Initially a practical style that kept helmets secure, it became, during the Edo period, a symbol of status, obedience to the Bushido code, and belonging to the warrior class. To remove it was more than a haircut. It was a symbolic death. Disgraced samurai might be forced to cut their topknot, or do it themselves, marking their unworthiness. In the harshest cases, this was followed by seppuku, a ritual suicide to atone for dishonor. I'm Roman. But as the empire evolved, hairstyles became more elaborate. Emperors like Nero and Commodus let their hair grow in dramatic styles inspired by Greek thinkers or divine statues. Some adopted what we now call the Roman top knot, curled or piled hair at the front, crafted to convey intelligence, youth, or elegance. These looks were deliberate, part of a carefully managed public image. Hair became a tool of propaganda. For Roman women, hairstyles carried even greater meaning. They reached architectural levels of complexity. The famous Flavian Tower style, an elaborate mass of curls and braids pinned high on the head, signified high status, made possible only through slave labor, heated tools, and hours of styling. The more intricate the hair, the richer the woman, as it showed she had time and servants. Hairstyles also signaled political loyalty. Empresses often introduced new styles through statues or coins which elite women then copied. Imitating the empress's hairstyle wasn't just admiration, it was a political statement. Enslaved people were often forced to wear their hair short or plain, denying them this form of identity. Soldiers kept functional, uniform cuts to emphasize discipline and utility. Meanwhile, some Romans deliberately grew their hair long or wore foreign styles to show defiance toward imperial norms. Gladiators, for instance, often had bold hairstyles to enhance their public personas, part athlete, part celebrity, part menace. In ancient Japan, hair wasn't just a personal trait but a symbol of discipline, duty, and tradition. This was especially true of the iconic shonmej, the top knot worn by samurai. It began as a practical choice. The shaved crown helped samurai wear their kabuto helmets more comfortably and securely. But as peace took hold during the Edo period, the style shifted from battlefield utility to a symbol of identity. The top knot became a sign of warrior status, honor, and loyalty to Bushido, the samurai code. Cutting it off wasn't just grooming, it symbolized disgrace or loss of rank. A dishonored samurai might be ordered to remove it or do so himself as a public sign of his fall. In extreme cases, it came before seppuku, the ritual suicide, to atone for shame. Japanese women's hairstyles conveyed strong social meanings. During the Heian period, 794 to 1185, noble women grew their hair extremely long, sometimes longer than their bodies, and wore it straight down their backs in a style called subrashi. This wasn't just about beauty, it represented grace, patience, and social rank. Growing and maintaining such long hair required time, care, and wealth, traits limited to the aristocracy. In the Edo period, women's hairstyles became more elaborate. Styles like the shimada, a coiled bun, were decorated with pins, combs, and ornaments, each carrying symbolic meaning. Certain hairstyles indicated marital status, age, or occupation. Courtesans and geishas wore striking and intricate hairdos not only to attract attention, but also to show their level of training and experience. Hair could also be used to challenge authority. Some shoguns passed laws regulating hairstyles according to social class, and breaking these rules, even by growing your hair differently, could lead to punishment or suspicion. Still, artists, actors, and masterless samurai, ronin, often defied these codes to express identity and defiance. In ancient Japan, hair was tied, both literally and symbolically, to duty, dedication, and emotion. Whether in the quiet discipline of a samurai or the graceful coil atop a geisha's head, hairstyles were forms of storytelling, honor, and deep cultural meaning. In ancient Africa, hair was more than style, it was a form of communication. From the detailed cornrows of the Sahel to the towering spirals of the Horn of Africa, hairstyles reflected identity, spirituality, and even survival. Before colonial influence, African hair culture was rich in symbolism, artistry, and resistance. In Nubia, Egypt's southern neighbor, stylized braids and twists conveyed status, age, and tribal affiliation. Nubian queens such as Amanitore and Amanisha Keto wore complex braided wigs and ornate headpieces that matched the grandeur of Egyptian royalty, boldly asserting their power and beauty. In present-day Nigeria, the Yoruba and Igbo treated hair as a creative art form. These intricate styles were more than decorative. They followed specific patterns for brides, warriors, or religious ceremonies. Hairdressers held sacred status, similar to priests, and trusting someone with your hair meant trusting them with your essence. Among the Haima people of Namibia, women still apply red ochre paste, made from stone powder and butterfat, to style elaborate braids. These ochre-coated hairstyles protect from the harsh desert and signify stages of life, from puberty to marriage. For Hema women, hair physically represents life's transitions. Perhaps the most intriguing part of African hair history is how it became a symbol of resistance. During the transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans used their hairstyles as quiet acts of defiance and remembrance. Cornrows weren't just practical. They acted as maps with certain patterns representing escape routes or safe meeting spots. Other styles kept ancestral traditions alive, resisting erasure with every twist and braid. In many West African communities, shaved heads signified mourning or spiritual change, while thick dreadlocks represented strength, a bond with the divine, or a warrior's status. Hair was sacred, never just about appearance. Although colonialism tried to stigmatize these styles and impose Eurocentric beauty ideals, the deep roots of African hair culture were never lost. They endured in memory, in hands, and in braids passed from mother to daughter. and are now being celebrated and reclaimed around the world. In ancient Greece, where marble statues and heroic epics shaped the Western world view, hair was more than a personal matter. It was a public statement of virtue, intellect, and belonging. From the tight curls of Athenian youths to the flowing locks of philosophers, hair defined one's place in society and reflected ideals of character. At first, long hair was a symbol of heroism and status. Warriors like Achilles and Odysseus were celebrated for their lustrous locks that suggested strength, nobility, and favor from the gods. But by the classical era, this ideal had evolved. A well-maintained, moderately short haircut became the preferred style for Athenian men, balanced by a beard that symbolized wisdom, maturity, and authority. The long beard, combined with a clean forehead and uncovered face, came to represent reason over emotion and intellect over instinct. Meanwhile, the heads of slaves and outsiders were often shaved to mark their lower status, making hair, and the right style of it, a sign of belonging and privilege. For women, hair was deeply connected to virtue and role within society. Respectable women wore their hair up and covered in public, braided or wrapped in buns, while long, loose hair was reserved for special moments. Rituals. Athena's precisely arranged battle helmet hairstyle reflected strategy and discipline, while Aphrodite's flowing curls symbolized sensuality and divine beauty. Hairstyles allowed mortals to emulate deities, adopting their divine qualities through imitation. In ancient China, hair was deeply connected to moral values, familial duty, and state authority. From the smooth top knots of Confucian scholars to the elaborate buns of Tang dynasty court women, hairstyles carried both visual appeal and symbolic meaning. Hair was not casually altered. Cutting it was seen as a serious offense. This was rooted in Confucian filial piety, which held that the body, including hair, was a sacred inheritance from one's parents. Altering it needlessly was viewed as disrespectful. This idea shaped Chinese culture for centuries. Even criminals had their heads shaved, not just as punishment, but as public humiliation and a symbolic break from society. Men typically kept their hair long, tying it in a bun or top knot. Scholars and officials often wore it with robes and hats to represent wisdom, order, and self-control. Seeing a man in public with loose or messy hair suggested insanity, grief, or rebellion. For women, hairstyles reflected both age and social position. Young girls usually had twin buns or side ponytails, marking them as unmarried. Once married, women adopted more formal styles, like a single coiled bun decorated with combs, jade, or gold pins. During the Tang dynasty, court ladies and empresses wore towering hairstyles adorned with phoenix ornaments, flowers, and silk, making grand visual statements. Hair also had political implications. Changes in dynasties often came with forced changes in appearance. When the Manchu-led Qing dynasty overthrew the Ming, they imposed the Q hairstyle, shaved front with a long braided pigtail, as a symbol of submission. Many Han Chinese refused, choosing death over what they saw as cultural betrayal. On the other hand, Taoist monks shaved their heads to renounce worldly ties, and Buddhist monks did the same to show detachment from material life and acceptance of impermanence. In ancient India, hair was sacred, linked to ritual purity, caste, and spiritual symbolism, and it served as a strong tool of both faith and social order. From the matted dreadlocks of sages to the shaved heads of pilgrims, their hair was left uncut, uncombed, and unrestricted growing into thick, matted locks called jata. These locks symbolized spiritual strength and a detachment from worldly concerns. The longer and wilder the hair, the stronger the statement that one had transcended vanity, family, and even personal identity. Sadhus sought to emulate Lord Shiva, the god of destruction and meditation, whose own jata was said to restrain the mighty Ganges. Yet for others, a shaved head represented the highest level of sanctity. In Hindu traditions, pilgrims often shave their heads before visiting holy sites, offering their hair as a symbol of surrender and purification. A child's first haircut was a significant rite of passage, believed to remove the bad karma of past lives. Mourning rituals required close male relatives to shave their heads as a sign of humility and renunciation of worldly attachments. Hair also reflected caste and marital status. Upper caste men typically kept a single tuft of hair on the crown of an otherwise shaved head, called the shika, marking them as twice-born and belonging to the priestly or scholarly class charged with sacred duties. To cut the shika unnecessarily was akin to social death. Women's hairstyles held equal significance. Unmarried girls usually wore their hair loose or in simple braids, while married women styled theirs in buns or intricate coils. A well-oiled, orderly braid signified discipline, beauty, and family honor. Decorative elements varied by region and status, but jasmine flowers, gold hairpins, and ornamental combs were common for festivals and weddings. Hair also possessed erotic allure. Ancient texts, like the Kama Sutra, spoke of sensual hair arrangements, and temple carvings like those at Khajuraho depicted women with long, flowing hair like fluid sculpture. Throughout ancient times, hair was more than a fashion statement. It was a means of expressing belonging, resistance, or rebellion. In many cultures, altering or rejecting dominant styles became a quiet form of protest against social norms or imperial rule. In Roman-occupied Judea, for example, Jews adhered to religious law. The Parthians and later the Sassanids, two powerful empires east of Rome, also used appearance as a weapon. Their rulers wore long curled hair and thick beards, representing divine authority and cultural pride. While the Romans saw it as exotic and effeminate, the Persians viewed it as regal and rooted in tradition. Their hairstyles sent a clear message: we are not you. Even in stricter societies, hair could serve as resistance. Enslaved people across empires, from Greece to the Americas, were often shaved to erase their identity. But when possible, they used their hair to preserve heritage, memory, and defiance. Braids could hide seeds, beads could carry meaning, and hairstyles could encode maps, myths, or secret messages. Women also used hair as a form of rebellion. In Sparta, unmarried women wore short hair, unlike other Greek women with long locks, showing independence and physical readiness. Some Roman women rejected fashionable hairstyles to reflect philosophical beliefs like Stoicism or early Christianity, opting for simpler, modest looks. And when emperors were overthrown, their signature hairstyles often disappeared too. Cutting one's imperial-style hair could be a risky but powerful political act of loyalty or defiance. In all these instances, hair wasn't just a reflection of society, it was a means to transform it. Across ancient cultures, when voices were silenced or battles erupted, hair became a medium of resistance. A braid, a shave, a curl. Each could speak louder than words ever could.